Members of the House of Lords have been discussing the main principles and purpose of the Assisted Dying Bill during a second reading there today. The bill seeks to enable adults who are terminally ill to be provided at their request with specified assistance to end their own life. 126 peers issued speaking requests during the debate, which started at 10 a.m. this morning, has lasted about 8 or so hours. So I ask you tonight, should assisted dying be legalised in this country? Scarlett, your thoughts?
I feel really strongly. I mean, I've always thought that, as you said at the top of the programme, we should be allowed to choose to die, that it's a right. But my father suddenly became terribly... He was always ill, but he suddenly became terribly ill. I mean, in absolute agony. It was quite clear, the doctors said, he would not only would he never get better, he would never get a tiny bit better. And they said this could go on for 2 weeks or a month of him, and he was unable to move. He had to be picked up, and during all the picking up, we did his shoulder in, until, luckily, a locum GP turned up with a lot of morphine, gave him a shot, and 15 hours later, he peacefully died. But it was just terrible. Absolutely terrible. I mean, I would not have been allowed to keep a dog like that. And it was dreadful that a man who actually, you know, incredibly dignified person was left to die in complete agony. And for his funeral, we had the charity of Dying with Dignity, and we got £1,000, and a lot of people came up and said how strongly they also felt about it.
Yeah, I have to say I've got goosebumps. You can't see because I've got long sleeves, but I've got goosebumps hearing that story. And I think it is, isn't it? It's such an emotive topic again, this one. Jonathan, what's your thoughts?
Well, I agree again with Scarlett. I'm afraid I have to agree with her.
I'm going to split you two up in a bit. In that corner agreeing there.
I think it's really important. And I'd be fascinated to find out what your viewers think, because according to the YouGov poll recently, 75% of people in Britain in favour of this assisted dying bill. They're actually ahead of MPs. Only a third of MPs are in favour of it. Also, they're ahead of, unfortunately, of the heads of the organised religion in this country. The chief rabbi, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Roman Catholic Church in Britain are against this bill. I don't know why. I mean, it's so much a question of dignity and compassion. Why should the ordinary public be more compassionate than these religious leaders?
I guess, you know, as you mentioned, people that are opposed to it, they will cite religious reasons. They will cite that there's concerns that perhaps people could feel pressured into making this decision because they don't want to be a burden. They are concerned that actually the doctors, for example, who's, you know, they're there to try and save lives, and all of a sudden they would argue that you're putting a doctor into...
This law says the person has to be categorised as 6 months left to live maximum. So, I mean, how many cases are there where relatives, children will say to their mother or father who's dying, you know, you're a burden, get on, you know, we can't go on with this. When 6 months later they're going to be dead anyway.
Well, I think you'd be surprised, you know, especially when there's some money involved and a bit of inheritance going on.
Yeah, but it's usually the other way around. It's the dying person who says, I don't want to be a burden.
Well, that's quite right, but that's how it's so dangerous, because when my mother was dying last summer, and I very much sympathise with you, Scarlett, some of her late words were she'd internalised the idea that you rightly adduced, Michelle, which is, I'm becoming a burden. You know, the NHS is totally stretched. And we're in a regime with this government, and no doubt other ones, where do not resuscitate commands in care homes with those poorly paid care home workers are, you know, the big event, and led to a whole lot of deaths. We're always told to protect the NHS. Now, what are we saying here? What we're saying is that because of the nasty situations that individuals encounter and families, which I do sympathise with, and there will be exceptions, important exceptions, nonetheless, we should rush on the basis of emotions to impulsive legislation. Now, can I just say, Scarlett, that before you come back, I was going to come to Jonathan. Now, Jonathan, I'm sympathetic, but you will remember a time at the tender age of 65 that, you know, when the majority of the British population favoured capital punishment. Just because, without the argument really being had yet in public, just because the majority of the British population thinks my grandmother, you know, mustn't suffer in pain, doesn't mean they're right, doesn't mean it's the basis for legislation.